Hello there, people of the internet. Go ahead and show clear with this Star BM right here. This is basically a 9mm 1911 with a couple of differences, but basically a 9mm 1911. And I'm going to go ahead and do this and freak a lot of people out. Today we're going to be talking about dry firing. I get a lot of people that yell at me for dry firing my handguns. And well, let's go ahead and let's talk about when that is an issue and when it is not an issue. So dry firing your handguns could be good, could be bad. A lot of people, they'll hop on the bandwagon and they'll tell me dry firing is bad for your firing pin and might potentially break it. Well, if you're dealing with a centerfire firing pin, like what this right here is, with 9mm Parabellum being a centerfire cartridge, if you're dealing with centerfire, then there's nothing for that firing pin to hit on whenever it juts forward through the breech face, and there's no primer there for it to smack into. Well, people still tell me that I'm going to break my firing pin, but I've never had a centerfire firing pin break, as long as it has a factory spring inside of it. Whenever you are dry firing that platform. However, if we have something like this is a Heritage Rough Rider 22 long rifle. 22 long rifle is a rimfire cartridge. Well, that rim on the 22 long rifle is a nice soft brass. And in order for that soft brass to detonate, that soft brass has to be pressed up against what would essentially be considered an anvil type system inside of the chamber itself that long rifle is sitting in. And that rim is actually crimped down in between that anvil surface in the chamber and the firing pin upon firing. And if there is no soft brass there to cushion the fall of the firing pin, then the firing pin will just smack into the far harder anvil surface on that chamber, and as a result, over time you could potentially mar or break your firing pin on a rimfire system. So rimfire is not necessarily something that you would want to dry fire, whereas centerfire, you can get away with that a lot more. Now, I don't recommend dry firing like older firearms, like this Star BM right here. It's from the 70s, and it's a pretty hard steel, and I would not feel bad about dry firing this thing. I wouldn't necessarily go out and repeatedly do it without some snap caps or something like that. But I do know that I'd rather dry fire this thing than a rimfire system. However, if you get yourself like a modern production Glock or something like that, the steel of those firing pins is so incredibly hard, and I would not worry about breaking a firing pin through dry firing a Glock or something like that. However, if you went out and you got yourself like a Luger, or as a matter of fact, I might have something of... Nope, I do not. But if you got yourself like a Luger or a C96 broom handle Mauser or some kind of older firearm, older handgun, like an original 1911 or something like that, then the metal on those are definitely going to be a lot softer, and they're going to be a lot older. And you don't necessarily want to go dry firing things like that. Metallurgy has come a very long way since the 1800s. And with how old those things are, how worn out, and how much use they potentially have gotten, I wouldn't necessarily trust dry firing with those things. Now, if you have yourself a handgun like this, and you have yourself some kind of like custom-made handgun, some kind of custom trigger job or something like that, whenever you dry fire that, well, the tolerances on the sear connection surfaces inside of that custom trigger job are exactly where they need to be in order to achieve like sub-pound pressures necessary to set off that trigger. Those sear engagement surfaces are like dead on exactly where they need to be. And whenever you dry fire it, that just does hell to surfaces like that. And as a result, over time, you are going to see some issues with extremely fine-tuned trigger jobs. If you have something like this surplus 1911 style firearm, where the trigger on this thing is probably about 4.5, maybe 5 pounds, then you don't necessarily have to worry about something like that. But in a very high-end, like match-style handgun, I wouldn't necessarily go dry firing that thing as well. In most of your like duty type handguns, your surplus handguns that aren't well aged, and most of your modern firearms and things like that, dry firing things like this simply are not going to damage anything because there's no connection surface for that firing pin to be able to strike and thus damage. Unless, oh, there's a big unless here, unless we are talking about your dirt cheap systems, like if we're talking about some of your cast part items, or some of your non-milled items, some of your not so strong firing pins and whatnot. If we're talking about your dirt cheap bottom of the barrel equipment that people go out and get simply because of the absolute minimal price point that it's set at, then dry firing those things over time, just because the firing pin and other various metallic materials simply are not of the adequate strength necessary to be able to dry fire those systems on a regular basis without any damage. A lot of the times, whenever I see issues with dry firing, it's either a rimfire, system and the firing pin is broken, or it's a extremely old system. Like, I actually know somebody who dry fired a C96 broom handle Mauser, and they actually broke the firing pin by dry firing it. I literally saw that with my own eyes. I was there when it happened, so I know that it's possible on those extremely old handguns, and that makes sense. However, modern firearms, if you still have soft, bottom of the barrel materials and bottom of the barrel metals, I have seen several handguns that are, modern production, just of the lower end budget tier modern production, that have broken upon dry firing. Normally it's like really bottom tier stuff. Like, I've seen more than one high point, both handguns and carbines. I've seen the firing pins on those break from dry firing. I've seen some Sky pistols. I've seen the firing pins on those break from dry firing. And I've seen at least one Taurus. I think it was a G2C. I could be wrong on that, but that doesn't really matter. I've seen at least one Taurus break from dry firing, so I do know that the bottom of the barrel, lower end handguns, you absolutely can risk breaking a firing pin from dry firing on those, simply because the materials are not as strong as they would be on something that is higher end. Now, in my personal opinion, I would not want to bet my life on something that would simply break just because you go and you dry fire it. There are some systems out there that actually require dry firing in order to disassemble the system. I think that Glock is one of them, how you have to dry fire it in order to take the slide off, and you get the sear out of the way of the engagement of the trigger surface area. But anyway, with things like that, the things that are actually able to stand up to dry firing, well, they just require good quality materials, and they require a system that does not beat itself to death. And like I said, I would not bet my life on something that is so negately susceptible to breakage just from dry firing. If your firearm in question is so mediocre that you can't even take the thing out and go click with it without it breaking, then that's not something that I want to, be fighting for my life with. If I have someone come up on me and I got to use that as a club, then I don't. If it's going to break from dry firing, it's going to break from a crack like that. Or if I, get knocked down and it lands on, the concrete, or I drop it or something, and it'll break from dry firing. It'll absolutely break from something like that. I wouldn't trust my life on something that is so negated, so pitiful, that it breaks from something as mediocre as dry firing, with the exception of a system like the 22 long rifle. Like, this is just a physical design in the system to where, like, dry firing is just not good for it. Or hell, it doesn't even have to take a cartridge. Right here, 1851, I think, Pieta. This is a 44 caliber, fun little handgun, black powder, and this right here, instead of taking cartridges, it takes cap and ball, and you put a percussion cap back here on the nipple. Well, if you don't have that percussion cap there and you dry fire this thing, eventually over time those nipples will actually start to mushroom far faster than they will if you actually had a primer cap there to absorb the recoil of the hammer dropping. So eventually those nipples on the back of the cylinder will wear out. I mean, they're going to wear out anyway. All physical, mechanical items eventually wear out through use. But eventually, over time, of you dry firing a system like this, those percussion cap nipples will also wear out to the point of not being usable, so you would have to replace them. And that would happen a lot sooner through dry firing than actually firing the handgun. So hopefully you guys learned something today about dry firing. I have had quite a few people like foam at the mouth and yell at me over my dry firing on this channel, and I figured I'd make a video talking about it. You'll see me dry fire some stuff, and you'll see me not dry fire some stuff. As a matter of fact, this right here is my Car 98. And typically with bolt-action rifles like this, whenever I bring these out, a lot of people have seen me do this. Whenever I close the chamber, I'll hold the trigger down, and that'll actually lower the sear gently to where I'm not dry firing it. And you can do that with a lot of rifles. The one rifle I have where you can't do that is the Arasaka, and I'm not quite positive onto why that doesn't happen. But for the most part, in the event that you don't want to dry fire your rifle, you can just hold down the trigger and slowly lower that sear. And for bolt-action rifles, that's definitely a good option. In the event that you are dealing with something like this, the spring and whatnot inside of this system is dramatically more powerful than the spring and whatnot inside of a system like this. As a matter of fact, I have like a 29-pound firing pin spring inside of this thing, I think. I think that's the weight that I have in this thing. So already, the original Mauser spring in this thing was a 19-pound. That is the original spec for the Mauser rifles. But the heavy firing pin spring inside of this thing already is going to put more tension on that firing pin than it normally would. As a result, over time I might break the firing pin. That's fine. You know, you can replace those. They're 12 bucks off the internet. But I would not want to dry fire this thing simply because of that extremely heavy firing pin spring. So as a result, many times you'll see me out here and I'll just kind of slowly drop that sear and avoid dry firing the rifle. Now things like the AR platform, go ahead and show clear for all the safety gurus out there. Things like the AR platform, whenever you drop that bolt down, if you have an AR platform that is so mediocrely made and so like soft, like the metal in it is so soft that dry firing this thing, if you end up wanting to dry fire it for some reason, if dry firing it mars up the firing pin to the point to where the rifle doesn't work, then man, you absolutely need a better AR-15. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I hope that you guys learned something today. I think I already said that earlier, but I'll say it again. Like, subscribe, share, description below, link to all sorts of stuff. Go check that stuff out. I'm sure somebody's going to bring up using snap caps. Yeah, by all means, if you want to use snap caps, you go right ahead. And in some systems, I would definitely recommend that over just blatantly dry firing. As a matter of fact, I use snap caps for a lot of stuff, including ball and dummy exercises. As a matter of fact, I might make a video on that particular exercise because it can be used to increase accuracy dramatically. Anyway, I'm rambling. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and I'm sure you guys will let me know what y'all think down in the comments. I bet that this right here is probably going to be a spicy video that a lot of people are going to disagree with. I'll see y'all in the next one. Since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.